Hi YouTube. Hello YouTube. Hello. That looks cool, right? Right. Hello YouTube. Let's see, how should I start this? Well, how about I introduce myself? My name is TJ. I live in Utah. I'm a senior at Brigham Young University studying cybersecurity, and I love cars. My love of cars, I'd say I got it from my dad. I got my first Hot Wheels when I was really young. My mom told me that I'd have a Hot Wheels and whatever other toys I decided to stuff in my pockets. Pretty much every time we went to Walmart, I'd always have to look at the Hot Wheels. I've still got this big bucket of Hot Wheels in my bedroom. I still buy Hot Wheels today. I bought one probably last week. I got them lined up on the top of my desk. The collection is never over. Car guys know what I'm talking about. I remember when the Cars movie came out, that really solidified my love of cars. I saw it in theaters, and ever since that point, every time I went to the mall, I had to go to the Disney store and look at the cars there. We've got a pretty big yard, so my dad got a riding mower to mow the lawn faster. And I'm like, a steering wheel and a lawnmower? That's awesome! So I always wanted to mow the lawn. My dad would take me on the lawnmower sometimes, just let me ride on his lap. And when I was about 12 was when he started having me mow the lawn on my own. And I was like, that's the childhood dream job right there for me. I got paid to start driving. I got my allowance through that, so that was pretty nice. I remember the first time I drove a car. It was actually a truck, a Chevy Silverado, I think a 2000. I was 13. I remember my mom was doing yard work and she had me drive the truck from one end of the house to the other so that she can put the weeds in the back. And I'm like, you want me to drive the truck? She's like, yeah, I'll let you drive the truck. I'm like, what? But she told me, don't let your foot off the brake because the truck is going to start rolling and you got to make sure to be able to stop. So I hopped in the truck, turned the key, turned on the engine, and I made sure to keep my foot on the brake. I let off. It started rolling and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome! I could barely fit over the steering wheel. I got so excited about it that I put a calendar event in my phone to remember the first day that I ever drove. It took me a while to get my learner's permit. It took me 3 tries to pass the test. My dad drove me the last time when I got my learner's permit. When we walked outside, he's like, all right, ready to drive home? I'm like, what? Are you kidding? On a busy street, 50 miles an hour? No way! I ain't ready for that. So instead, it was that night, we were picking up pizza for dinner. My older brother and younger sister were in the back of the car, and my dad had me get in the driver's seat. They were freaking out, and I remember after turning on the car, there was a guy walking past, and he gave me 2 thumbs up. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure he knew I was a new driver because I was so small. I was a late bloomer. So I drove home. It was only like 5 minutes, and we were on side roads the whole time. Nothing scary like State Street. Hello, love. Hello. You're so pretty. After that moment, I was always asking my parents if I could drive. I had to get my hours in to get my license, so they let me drive. I drove a lot with my learners. I got my driver's license on my birthday, first thing in the morning, and then the first time that I drove on my own, I drove that same truck, and about 2 blocks away from the house, I was driving past a cop, and I'm like, Oh my gosh, it's a cop! Oh, it's a cop! Okay, he's good. He's fast. He's fast. So, so 16-year-old brain, first time driving, seeing a cop, gets your nerves, But to this day, I haven't gotten a ticket. I got close one time when I went a little bit faster than a cop at a red light. There's my sister. I was going a little bit faster than the cop at the red light, so he pulled me over. First time I'd ever been pulled over, and he was like, "Do you know how fast you're going back there?" In my head, I'm like, I know I wasn't going 10 over like people usually go. I managed to get off with a warning, and I haven't been pulled over since. My first car I got while I was 16, I inherited it from my brother, who also inherited it from my grandma, who bought it from Canada. They had lived in Canada before, and there must have been a good deal up there or something, so she imported the car. A 1998 Toyota Camry. That was a pretty good first car. I enjoyed it. I drove it harder than it should have been driven. It was not a sports car, but that's how I drove it. I always drove that car to high school, even though I live like a few blocks away. But I'm a car guy. I gotta drive my car to school. So I drove the 2 minutes to school. I had to make sure to get there early enough to get parking. I did end up being late to class a couple times because I didn't get parking. On the way home from school one day, I live on a hill. I had to go up and then across at the top and then go down towards my house. And while I was on that top part, the gas pedal stopped working. So I shifted into neutral and coasted the way to my house. Made it back to my house, put it in park, turned off the car, and that car never drove again. My dad took it to a shop, and they said that the timing belt had snapped and it bent a piston. So it was either $1,000 for a new engine or a couple thousand for a new car. So I'm like, I kind of like the sound of the second option. It was a good car, but I kind of wanted something different. My brother had been talking about Mini Coopers, so I got on KSL and started looking at Mini Coopers. After a bit of searching, I found a cherry red convertible stick shift. And before this, my brother had a stick shift at the time, a 2000s Nissan Maxima. That car was also on its last leg. He ended up killing that car. But before then, he didn't really let me drive it much. But on occasion, my mom took me to the church parking lot in his car, and she taught me how to drive stick. And I thought that was so cool. So I wanted a stick shift, so that's what I was looking for. This Mini was stick. I showed the listing to my dad, and he's one to always research, make sure that it's a good purchase before he actually goes and buys a car. But when I showed it to him, he's like, all right, let's go look at it tomorrow. I'm like, what? That never happens. So that's what we did. Next evening, we drove down and looked at the car. We both test drove it, and we knew there was something off with the car. We thought it was a wheel bearing or something. The convertible top also didn't work. So we talked them down from, I think, 3,000 to 2,600. And I drove that car all the time. My parents had some pretty nice cars, but I was always like, I'm driving my car. I love my Mini. Basically a street legal go-kart. Super fun to take in the corners. After we test drove it, damn. Oh, maybe this trip wasn't a good idea. Oh, okay. Anyway, after we bought it, my dad's like, all right, you get to drive it home. We were like an hour away driving on the freeway. So I'm like, okay, I'll drive it home after only a few times driving stick. I didn't stall, so that was good. But my dad drove behind me the whole time. When I talked to him a few years later, he's like, I did that? So, but I made it home with my car. Yeah. The Camry died in January. We bought the Mini in February, and in June, not July, I drove my sister and my cousin to Lagoon, about 2 hours away. I drove back home, and then I drove back up to pick them up, and on the way back home again, I got off the freeway, and the transmission broke. Right after I got off the freeway. I made it about another mile probably before the transmission said no more. So I had to stop at the side of the road, turn off the car, and call my dad. He brought my mom's car over and towed me back home. We couldn't go over like 5 miles an hour because the transmission would keep trying to get in gear even when I held in the clutch and had it in neutral. My dad found another transmission online after about a month, and it took us 3 weeks to get it put in. It's still running, but I think it's gonna need another transmission pretty soon. There have been times where I thought about selling my Mini. When I bought this, I was thinking about selling it. Then after buying this, I drove the Mini again and I'm like, nope, can't sell it. This is too fun. I love the stick shift. Let's see. A few years ago, I bought another Mini Cooper for $700. I found it on KSL and I decided I was gonna fix it up and resell it. So I told my parents I'd have it fixed in a month. The car didn't start when I first got it. We took it home on my cousin's trailer and had it charging overnight, and then it started the next morning, but it sounded bad. It had some really bad rod knock. So I opened up the oil pan, and one of the piston rods, the bearing had slipped, so it was pancaking and making that rod knock. I got those bearings replaced, and then it was good for about a day, and then the rod knock came back. Opened it up again, and the bearing had completely overlapped. It was now about the thickness of a paper, so I was like, all right, I gotta do more work on this. So what I said was gonna be a month turned out to be a year. My parents weren't too happy about it, but they were all right in the end after finally finishing it. That paid for my 2001 Toyota 4Runner. I never really looked at Toyotas much, but then I was on my 2-year church mission, and I had a companion that talked up Toyotas, and when I was in the mission office, we had a Toyota Tundra that we drove around to move furniture and all that. And it was after that I was like, oh yeah, Toyotas are the thing. That Tundra was the crew cab, so it had the rear window that rolled down, and every time I rolled it down I was like, flex window! I always called it a flex, because you don't really see any other cars that have a rear window that can roll down. And so when I found out that the 4Runner had the same thing, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta get a 4Runner. This was a couple years after I had gotten home from a mission. And after I got the Mini fixed up, I had it listed, and I immediately started looking for a 4Runner. And I found mine for a really good deal. I got that for $3,200. And looking back at it now, I'm like, that is amazing, because all the other 4Runners that I've seen, I haven't seen that good of a price for a while. That was a couple years ago when I bought that. And last year, I decided to do it again. I looked on KSL and found another 4Runner, 2000, for $1,200. The transmission was in bad shape. The guy was about 5 minutes away from my house, and so I managed to drive it home. My dad drove behind me again, just so I wouldn't get stranded. I barely managed to get it back home. It would end up slipping gears if you drove it too much. I bought that at the end of last January. And then during the summer was when I really put in the effort into it. I found a used transmission a couple hours away. Took me a while, but my dad helped me put that into. It also had a crunched front bumper, so I had to replace that as well. I moved the bumper guard from my 4Runner to this one to sell it. I've been planning on replacing the bumper on my 4Runner with an off-road bumper. Maybe I'll do that this summer if I get enough motivation for it. I'll end up making a video on it when I get to it. This past summer, I was driving home on a 2-lane road with a middle turn lane, and I was at a stoplight with a car in front of me. The light had turned green and we had started going through, and this motorcycle totally screams past us. I had my convertible top down and it was so loud. I'm like, my gosh, why would anyone do that? I had kind of subconsciously liked motorcycles this whole time. I have a dirt bike that I haven't been riding much recently, but I've had the motorcycle for 10, 15 years. And so it was interesting. I first learned manual on that motorcycle, and then after driving my Mini for a while, I went back to the motorcycle, and that clutch was so much easier. So after that motorcycle screamed past me, I'm like, man, it'd be cool to have a motorcycle. So got on KSL again and started looking at motorcycles. I liked the sport bike look, so I was looking at the different sport bikes, bullet bikes, and this one came up. I ended up picking this one up for $2,600. It had been totaled and fixed up again, and it runs great. I rode it home. I didn't have my motorcycle license yet, so my dad drove behind me again. He's helped me with every car that I've bought, and now motorcycle. So pretty awesome. I made sure to get my motorcycle license. I got my motorcycle gear. You either make sure to ride Make sure to wear motorcycle gear, you other motorcyclists. You gotta be safe. It's important. This basically turned into my daily as soon as I bought it. I rode it to campus every day. So I've driven this around for a few months, and then it started getting really cold, so I didn't ride it as much. A couple months after I bought my motorcycle, my dad decided that he wanted to go riding with me. So he got his FZ09. He actually bought it with a broken engine, and he found a replacement, fixed it up. Now it's running pretty great. We haven't gone riding much because it was already getting cold once he started fixing it. So as soon as it warms up, then we're gonna be having more rides together, having fun. I think that's about it. I'm gonna start making videos on each of my rigs and stuff I put on them. So look out for those. There's gonna be a video somewhere here when I actually get more videos. So look out for that once those come out. And then you can subscribe here. Thanks for watching. Bye.